Welcome to the Orange Pew. Welcome back to the Orange Pew. This is going to be a great episode. I'm really looking forward to it. I first of all have to say, welcome, Michael, all the way from Jerusalem.
It's great to be here. Great to be back in Canada.
It's hard to believe that you're sitting here with me, but I'm excited about that. And we're going to get into a great interview in a few moments. But today, I'm also very excited about my co-host. So we were dropped like a hot potato by Doug Frederick this week. And so I called Sarah Lee in.
Of course. The faithful wife steps in always,
Yes, and
right?
You were
Yeah.
actually his first choice.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, but really I know it's not true.
And you're excited to be here too because you know Michael and Vanessa.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, when I think of Michael, I think of him standing like at the Mount of Olives and, and the dome is behind his head and he's talking to us all, so it's really kind of surreal to be sitting in this little studio with you on an orange pew.
I'm honored that that's how you think of me. But yes, an orange pew. Very, very Canadian.
Yes,
very
welcome to the
Canadian.
Orange
CLA,
Pew. Yes, so these are the old pews that we used to have, and it's kind of nostalgic, so kind of retro.
It is. It's bringing me back memories of my childhood. So
Yeah.
thank
Yes.
you, Derek.
They're kind of lumpy though, but
Yes,
you'll
right,
be
they're
okay. You'll be
uncomfortable,
okay.
We might as well get right into it because we only have an hour or so, and I want to talk about what you just said, kind of bringing back your childhood. So, Michael, this of course is a podcast for our church, and you will have spoke at all of our campuses by the time that this is locked and loaded, to use a Steve Nicholson term. But we have a big network of 1,200 churches, C to C to C, and I really am excited about introducing you to the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada network. So, how does a kid from Toronto end up being in Israel, and not only being in Israel, but becoming a citizen of Israel? This is just a crazy story.
So I'm glad to be here and know that this is going out to the whole PAOC, because I grew up in a PAOC church, Evangelical Temple in Toronto, and just grew up there as a young man, passionate, wanted to serve God, wanted to give my life to Him, didn't know what that was going to look like, and somehow God brought me on a journey to Israel. So as a young man, I thought I was going to be part of sending the Great Commission around the world, just go into business and send money to the missions field. When I was 16 years old, I went on a 10-day fast, and I just said, God, there's got to be more that you want to do in my life than just make money and send money to the missions field. Like, what do you want me to do? Just really started praying. I had a heart for missions. I attended youth conferences with our church, and we went on the mission field, went to Africa, went to South America, and just wanted to be connected to what God was doing. And I was on a 10-day fast. I was with a group of people in Los Angeles. And while I was on that trip, I felt like God said, wake up one morning and go on a bus to the LAX airport. And something was going to happen on that bus that was going to change the course of my life.
Wow.
And so I just followed the Lord, and I was 17 at the time. I woke up, got on the bus, drove. Nothing happened at the airport. We're coming back, and I'm talking to the bus driver, and I'm just thinking, I must have misheard the Lord. Nothing's going to happen. And on that bus, the bus driver was cut off all of a sudden, and he kind of yells out, "Oh, that's not very kosher." Then he looks at me and he says, "Do you know what the word kosher means?" And I respond, "Yes." And he says, "Well, what does it mean?" And I said, "Well, it's something Jewish to do with food." I didn't really know what kosher meant. And then he asked me a question. He said, "In high school, did you ever study British history?" And I said, "Well, yes, I'm Canadian, and I study where we came from and how we got to where we are today. So of course we know about British history." So then he looked at me and then said, "Then why, if you claim to be a Christian, have you never studied the Jewish background of where you came from?" And I didn't really have a good answer. And at that very moment, we pull up to my stop. I get off the bus. He drives away, and I'm standing on the side of the road saying, "God, is this supposed to be the thing that changes my life?" Again, 17 years old. And I just remember going to a room alone, started to pray, and said, "God, what does this mean?" And the Lord led me to Isaiah 60, 61, and 62. And these chapters all are referencing Israel and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And I didn't even understand really what I was reading. I just started to weep. And I heard the Lord speak to me as clear as day, "Michael, you're going to spend the rest of your life living and doing ministry in Jerusalem."
Wow.
Now, my first response was,
How did you hear that?
I
was an
heard the
impression.
audible voice of God.
was-
We were in a little Catholic guest house in Los Angeles where we were staying. I was in a little room. I just heard the voice of God saying, "The rest of your life doing ministry in Jerusalem." And at that point, I was running a company. I'd graduated from high school. I'd actually left my parents' home at a young age, and I was just searching. It's like, God, what does that mean? Now, my response was, Israel's the last place I'd want to go. I actually said, God, send me to Africa. I thought that's where you went on missions, right? I didn't have a desire to go to Israel. I mean, I grew up in a church that loved Israel, but it just didn't seem important. It seemed like it was important thousands of years ago, and it would be important again in the future, but it doesn't really seem important to the Great Commission today. And so, but I said, God, if this is you, I'm willing, but you got to make it happen. I don't even know a single Jewish person. I don't know where to start. I don't know how I'm going to end up in Israel. So that's how it started. Was just a step of.
Well, I want to say, because we have 30 or something heading to Thailand. So we've got high school students heading off in spring break, and I'm excited that they're doing this trip. I'm excited that their spiritual discipline's connected to it, and I'm excited that they can hear from God too in grade 11, grade 12.
And I think that's so important. As I think about my journey, it's so important for everyone who's listening and watching, just to think, God speaks to young men and women. The disciples most likely were teenagers when he called them. So it's not that God doesn't have to wait. The Holy Spirit doesn't have to wait till we're at a certain age or at a certain experience level, or, we got to really try a bunch of things first. He could speak to us as a young man, a young woman. And I want to really honor my parents for having the faith to send me to Africa when I was 13 on a mission trip by myself, because that started to put the seeds inside my heart saying, God, I want to be connected to something bigger than myself, bigger than my world, see people that I may never ever meet again, but see their reality. And I believe that created a receptivity in my spirit towards hearing from God and saying, I want to be part of what you're doing in the world, not just what do you want me to do with my life. So it's really a bigger question.
Yeah.
And then it was just one step of obedience. And I think for anyone who's ever felt a call from God, that was the most crazy thing. Here I am, a 17-year-old, not even a man yet, from Canada.
Yeah.
And somehow I'm going to end up in Israel. I don't know anyone in Israel. I'm going to lead a ministry in Israel. How's that going to work?
Yeah.
And so I just start reading my Bible. It's always a good place to start. And God opens up his word, and all of a sudden I start getting a heart for Israel. No, I didn't read a book. No one talked to me about it. I just started reading and saying, wow, I've never read this before. Things in his word just came alive. Like Romans 9, where Paul says, I have this great sorrow and this never ceasing anguish. You're kind of confused because you're like, you just said all these great things. You just said we're adopted as sons and daughters and all things work together for good and we're more than conquerors. And yet Paul has this pain, this never ceasing pain in his heart. And he goes on to say he has this pain and this burden for his people, the Jewish people, that they would know Yeshua, Jesus, as their Messiah. And I remember reading that and thinking, I don't even have a little bit of a pain. I don't have a remote even grief in my heart about this. And yet Paul has this ceaseless pain and agony. And I just believe there must be something wrong in my heart, not wrong in your word, God. God, would you change my heart? That was my prayer. God, would you change my heart?
And at this point, you're still in Canada.
I know. I'd moved.
Or
I was working with a ministry in America.
Okay.
Running a company from Canada. So I was.
Okay. So you're in the United States.
Yes.
You haven't made it to Jerusalem yet.
No.
And you're still a teenager.
I'm still a teenager. I was 17 years old. So.
Okay, I find that quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a teenager, all these things.
I had a real hunger for God, and I really think those mission trips were important, and just the belief of. I remember being at a church camp in the summer. We went to a camp at Deer Lake in kind of central Ontario, and I just remember listening to the different preachers and the speakers, and I had hunger. I would be on the front row and say, I'd linger, I'd be the last one there, and always go up for prayer. And I wanted to be used by God. I didn't know what that would look like in any way. And Israel was not at all on my radar. I remember I told my parents, now can you imagine? Imagine your 17-year-old coming to you and saying, God's called me to do ministry in Israel and Jerusalem for the rest of my life. They probably thought I was a little bit crazy, but they didn't show it, and I appreciate that. And they just started to see God confirm steps along the way. So I got to meet a Messianic family in Texas. I started learning about Passover and the Jewish Feast and Festival. I'm like, if I'm going to end up there, I better know. And after a year of doing that, I decided I got to take a trip and I got to go to Israel. I was 19 years old, and I went to Israel for the first time by myself. No tour guide, no bus or insurance or anything. Just a little bit crazy. Don't recommend it. Don't try this at home. But it was quite the experience. And that's where I came to Israel, and God just said, "This is your home." Now I didn't know what I was seeing. Right? I'm like, "Oh, this is Capernaum." I didn't know the history. I'm just listening to worship music in my ears, walking around. Almost got myself killed a couple times, hiking places I probably shouldn't have been hitchhiking. And but I met someone there who was a friend of a friend. The only person I knew was this friend of a friend, lived in Jerusalem, and he takes me out to dinner. He hears my story, and he says, we can offer you a job and a visa. And I'm thinking, this is God. It's amazing. Now, the visa, he didn't have the authority to offer, and the job was raise your own support. So it's one of those kind of miracles. But what I didn't know was that he worked for King of Kings, which is a church, a community in Jerusalem, started by Wayne and Ann Hilsden and co-founded by the Cantillons as well. Now, 40 years before. So I had no idea that in moving to Jerusalem, there would also be this Canadian connection coming to be on staff with this church, King of Kings. And that was how I met Wayne and Ann Hilsden.
So just a few weeks ago, we had Wayne on this podcast. And so he was able to share a little bit of his story, and he was able to talk a little bit about King of Kings, and he talked a little bit about you, actually, because there was a stage in his life where he felt like he was leading King of Kings, and God was going to birth something brand new. So that's where we're going to get to in this podcast. But there are two things I want to know before we get to what eventually becomes Firm. So the first thing is you become an Israeli citizen.
Absolute miracle.
So God was at work decades before.
Yes. Long before, and this is almost the most impossible part of the story, if you would, was not just me getting to Israel. For those who don't know, to live in Israel long term as a Christian is not an easy thing. Right. You either have to be Jewish or you have to marry someone who is Jewish to get long-term citizenship. Even Wayne and Ann, they've been there 40 years, miraculously on visas. They finally got permanent residency after over 30 years in the country. So I was on a 2-year volunteer visa. I mean, I sold everything, bought a one-way ticket, moved everything of my life out to Israel, but I was on a 2-year visa. Like there was an expiration date, and after that, you have to go home. You can't just keep renewing. And while we were there, and after I connected with Wayne, we were starting Firm, I get a call from my aunt, and she said, "Hey, your grandmother who had passed away, she said she was Jewish, she had Jewish heritage. Only the women in the family know." She's like, "Your dad doesn't know about this." Wow. But she had a menorah, she had a Star of David, she had these traditions. It was passed down through the women in the family. Now, my grandmother, I'm Italian, 100%. Sicilian. I mean, my grandparents were born in Sicily, and my grandparents were all like Roman Catholic as far as I knew. So this was like a shock to me to hear this. I'm thinking, I'm called to be a Gentile to provoke Israel to jealousy, and then I get this call out of the blue less than 6 months after living in Israel. So what do? I go with my dad to Italy for the first time. We meet family that I've never met before. My dad's translating Italian, and we go and we prove the story. We hear about the family members that were Jewish, and the town my grandmother was from was 40% Jewish. We're able to bring all of this to a rabbi in Toronto, and that rabbi wrote us a letter, and somehow, miraculously, I was able to use that to immigrate to Israel and become an Israeli citizen. Literally, probably less than a 2% chance of that happening, and it happened in record time. It was just a confirmation that God had called me there.
That is one of the most amazing parts of your story.
It's an incredible part.
Because you have an Italian name. Your last name is?
Mistretta.
Yes. It doesn't sound Jewish.
No, it doesn't sound Jewish. But you know what's interesting is there are a lot of Italian Jews, and usually what they would do is they would name the last name after a city, because they would change their Hebrew last name to a city. So Mistretta is a city in Sicily. Also, my grandmother's maiden name, Messina, is a city in Italy. So there's all sorts of Jewish tradition around that. That's very interesting.
And the second thing that happened to you before we get to the story of Firm is that you met someone and married. And so it's Michael and Vanessa. Vanessa's not with us today, but
this is what I want to know. How does
did
Vanessa come in?
You know, they're all intertwined, and when you're following the will of God and you're walking in obedience, things just happen to fall in place. So I moved out to Israel on a whim, not knowing what I was going to do, and somehow within the first 6 months, God brings Wayne and I together, and we're starting Firm, and we'll talk about that. Well, as we're starting Firm, I say, yes, let's start Firm. We launch at a conference at one of our church partners, one of our board members at church in Colorado. And at that very conference, little did I know, Wayne had bumped into Vanessa a few months earlier. He had known her from some ministry circle. She's a Jewish believer, and Jesus had grown up in the Messianic Jewish community in America. And Wayne said, hey, you need to meet my colleague, Michael. Now, Wayne was in his 60s, so when she heard him say colleague, she thought it was someone with kids, maybe grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
She thought we were, Wayne wanted me to help raise some money from their organization that they were at. I wanted a whole lot more than money. And so we ended up meeting at the conference, and she said, oh, you're the one that Wayne wanted me to meet, and you're far more handsome than I would have expected. I'm glad she's not here to verify the story, but we really hit it off until she found out that I was 9 years younger than her, and then she was like, absolutely not. And then I just had to woo her slowly and surely, and I think she saw God's hand on my life, our desire to live in Israel. She had a desire to live in Israel long term as well. And she ended up moving back to Israel. We got married there, and now we have two beautiful little boys, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and their names are Azariah and Hananiah, which you get extra points if you know where that's from in the Bible. Do you know, Sarah?
Uh-oh.
Do you know?
Well, Doug Frederick,
like,
the other co-host, probably would.
know.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Oh.
Actually, we're going to circle.
I know the name. I've heard the names, but you want me to pinpoint? Sorry.
It's a very famous story. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, they are Hebrew names. Azariah, Hananiah, and Mishael. Anyway, so Azariah is Abednego's Hebrew name, Hananiah is Shadrach's Hebrew name. And so we got a little trend going.
I have been
She's
schooled.
taught that story.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah,
the first three chapters of Daniel, those are the names they use, but we know the ones from the story with the burning
from the Sunday school
furnace,
stories that I grew up with. Yeah.
Exactly. Those little felt Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yes.
We're actually going to come back and talk about your kids a little bit later.
Great.
Just because of what happened in October to your family. But so you get Jewish citizenship, you get married, and so both you and Vanessa are now citizens.
Yeah, both of us are citizens. When I met Vanessa, she was already a citizen. She'd done the same process.
Okay, she had already done that, yeah.
So we're both citizens living in Jerusalem.
And now you had met Wayne. Wayne was planning the succession plan with King of Kings and had this idea, and it was an idea that God actually had given you the word for.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how that began.
Yeah, again, quite miraculous. I had moved to Israel. 3 months later, I came back, and I was speaking at a couple churches that were supporting me because I was raising my own support. So speaking at a couple churches, and Evangelical Temple was one of them, and there was another church. It was actually a Baptist church that I spoke at, and there was someone, a businessman in the front row of the Baptist church, that he said to me, I have a word from God from you, which I didn't expect from someone at the Baptist church, right? So we go out to lunch, and he says, I believe that God's calling you to start a ministry in Jerusalem right now. Now, I had moved to Israel 3 months before. I was 21 years old, and I thought, why do we need another ministry? I mean, I just moved there? Absolutely not. But I said, I'll pray about it. And as I prayed, about 2 weeks into praying about this, I hear God say the word firm. 5 times. I heard firm, and I heard talk to Wayne Hilsden, who I knew who Wayne was. I was working at King of Kings, but he didn't hire me. We didn't have a relationship. We had never had a one-on-one conversation. So I just heard firm, talk to Wayne in the context of starting a ministry. So I go and I reach out to Wayne. Hey, can we set up a meeting? And 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in his living room. I'm sharing this whole story that I just shared with you with him. And Wayne, I really give Wayne the credit. Wayne hears from the Holy Spirit, and he's quite decisive as well. By the end of the conversation, he says, this is God, this is the Lord. God had given him the vision firms a few years before, and he was looking for someone else to start it. And 2 weeks earlier, right when God spoke to me, he felt like God told him, Wayne, you need to start firm right now. But he said, I don't have the time, money, people, resources, but yes, God. 2 weeks later, I'm in his living room saying, here I am. I'm supposed to help you start this thing called Firm. So he took it as a sign from the Lord. It was a sign for the Lord for us. And we really started this partnership at that point to co-found this ministry, really to become a servant ministry to so many other churches and ministries in the country.
When I was sort of trying to figure out what Firm was, and you can give us the
what does it stand for?
Yeah, give us the acronym.
So Firm, the vision God had given Wayne was Fellowship of Israel-related ministries. Really, we serve a network of 70-plus different gospel-centered churches and ministries in Israel. Why? Israel's a country of 10 million people, so we're smaller than Canada, roughly 25% of the population in Canada. But of the 10 million people, we only have about 30 to 40,000 Jewish believers in Jesus, maybe 5,000 to 6,000 Christian evangelical Arabs. So we're talking about a fraction of 1% that are born again believers in the whole nation.
Right.
And so it's so important for us to help strengthen, unite, and resource all these different ministries to work together towards a day what we're believing for, which is a day where every person in Israel will be transformed by the love of Yeshua. And we believe there's this promise in Scripture. We read Romans 11:26, where Paul says, there's coming a day where all of Israel will be saved. The fullness of the Gentiles will come in and all of Israel will be saved. And that's what we're believing for. That's what we're praying for. And we exist as a servant ministry to really lift up the arms of our local partners and reach more people.
So this idea took root at a strategic time in your life and Wayne's life to bring people together. It's obviously a movement that unifies. It also helps other organizations be accountable. So not just anybody can join.
Correct.
Like you actually hold people to a standard.
Yeah,
Tell us
yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so we were asking ourselves the question when we started Firm, why do so many people want to be involved in Israel? And maybe it either feels a little political or it feels a little bit weird. Like, surely there's got to be a safe and trusted gospel-centered way to get involved. And I know a lot of pastors say to me, I don't get involved in Israel because it feels only political. So, like, is there a non-political, kingdom-minded, kingdom-centered way to engage in Israel? And our answer is absolutely, but it was a little hard to find out how. And so we started by vetting all different ministries and congregations in the country. Who's doing good work? Who's reputable? Where's their actual fruitfulness? They go through a process. We put our stamp of approval on them. And then we also say, we're coming and we want to serve you. So how can we help you and your ministry even function better, have the resources you need? How can we work together to make even a bigger impact? For example, everyone who's working in youth ministry in the country, and we're not a big country like Canada, we can drive across the whole country in 2 hours. We could all gather a nationwide day event, and it's not a big deal. You're not even getting on an airplane. And so how can we gather all the youth leaders and say what's working, what's not working, and how can we really reach our nation's next generation nationwide for the Lord? And we do that, those levels of collaboration.
Yeah. And the accountability, the unity, the ability to counsel people who are maybe starting new ministries.
Yeah.
We have something in Canada called the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. It's an umbrella that brings denominations and churches and organizations together. But what I love is you're hands-on. Like you're very hands-on, helping individual churches or ministries, parachurch groups kind of get their kite in the air.
Yeah, and we love that because I think we're such a small country that we need to be stimulating how are we working together and how are we really reaching people. And so especially stuff over the last few months, which we will talk about, but even over the last several years, we've seen more people willing to work together than ever before. And what we find in Israel often, as you would in most developing nations spiritually, so Israel's not a developing nation maybe economically, but spiritually, I would say we're very much in our incubation, embryonic season, where really we have first generation, maybe second generation believers, and maybe we're just starting to have third generation believers. There's a lot of young people that are looking for mentorship. They're looking for spiritual fathers and mothers. They're looking for people to believe in them. Yes. And they're saying, man, we have a dream and a vision, but we want someone to lift up our arms while we do that. That's the picture of Aaron and her holding up Moses' arm. But we want to be that to the young leaders, the creative new ministry ideas happening in the country. And that's what we get to do.
I'm going to get you to give a couple of illustrations of these 70 ministries. But when we were with you, and I want to say to Canadian pastors, Canadian church leaders from C to C to C, that you could go to Firm and you actually, well, not right now, but you lead tours of the Holy Land. But it's not just a normal tour. It's a special tour.
Yes. So most people come to Israel. The average age would be in your 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And they come on a Bible tour where you see where Jesus walked, which is essential, and you want to do that. But if you miss what is happening with the believers in the land, if you miss, wow, there's Jewish believers in Jesus and Christian Arabs, and how are they working together, and how does even what's happening in the body in Israel really give us a picture of what the Messianic kingdom looks like as opposed to the conflict we see in our news today, then you miss out on a huge aspect. So we want people to come and see the living stones, and we do that for pastors and churches usually dozens of times a year.
Like, I loved when we were there in this past June, and we went with the Beautiful Land Initiative, and we were just picking up
trash,
garbage and stuff along the
Sea of Galilee.
The Sea of Galilee.
Yeah.
And there was locals there, and they were kind of like, "What are you?"
And they can't
doing?
Understand why you're doing that, because that's the place where they take drugs and get high.
Yeah.
But we're saying, hey, no, this is the place like our Savior walked. This is where he did 80% of our ministry, and we're here to serve. So it's an experience for you guys, but it's a testimony for us.
Yeah.
It's a testimony. We get to go and say, man, this is changing your paradigm of who Christians are and what they believe.
Yeah, it was. I love that day being involved.
And I think
out
we had been to Israel before on a Holy Land tour, but we never saw that.
Yeah.
And so Sarah just said, it was one of the best experiences that she had. She also overheated that day. And
I
almost-
kind of
Very,
passed
very
out a
hot
little
day,
bit.
very
It was,
hot
a, it was a
Yeah.
very hot day.
Yeah.
And picking
Just
up
for a
garbage
few
along.
All
minutes.
Canadians do not come to Israel in July and August.
Yeah.
So you do not want to
Yeah.
come in July and August.
So, but I love that you could come on a tour and you meet people
Yeah.
that you would never meet.
Yeah.
And you participate with them.
Yeah.
And even that day, Firm encouraged them by giving them a significant offering that day.
And that's what's been amazing. As churches have and people have partnered with us, we have this model where really the primary way we raise support is through the Firm Foundation. And we basically take that money, 100% of it goes out to our local partners. And so we're able to be generous to these 70 different ministries. And you asked for some examples. I mean, some of them are helping women off the street or men out of drug addiction, or helping Holocaust survivors, or to disciple young people. Or there's one organization that just recently during the war has mobile dental clinics that have been set up to help different people in need. Or there's a wide range, but the common thread that unites them all together, whether working with Jews or Arabs, whether it's on a university campus or it's on the streets of Tel Aviv, the common thread is that they're gospel-centered. Like, we have a heart to see our people come to know Jesus, Yeshua, as Messiah. And so we might do acts of love and acts of service or acts of discipleship or acts of evangelism, whatever it is, but we're doing it with this hope that people see who Yeshua really is. And there's a stigma in Israel. We're trying to destigmatize who Jesus is and who a Messianic Jew is, because we believe there's going to be more people that come to him because of that.
So many questions come to mind about what it would be like to minister to Jews. And I talked to Wayne a little bit about this, that actually Christians are a bit low on the totem pole, so to speak, because of witnessing to Jews.
Yeah.
And I wasn't maybe quite aware of that. I
wasn't either.
I wasn't expecting kind of the vile hatred, people marching in front of the church when we were arriving. I was shocked by that.
Yeah, so I also was shocked because I grew up in a POC church that loved Israel. So I just thought Christians love Israel. So Jews
and Jews must
love Christians, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's
why
what I
wouldn't
thought
you?
too.
And as I started going on this journey, there was a book I read that I really recommend for every pastor.
Okay.
It's called Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. Gruesome title, but it's called Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. It's by Dr. Michael Brown, and it just gives a history between the church and the Jewish people over the last 2,000 years. And as you read this book, you realize, wow, there's a lot of the history that maybe me growing up in a POC church that loved Israel, I'm unaware of other parts of history, like certain theologians that even might be celebrated in Christendom, but like Martin Luther, that in his later years wrote books kind of
That were anti-Semitic.
Anti-Semitic on the Jews and their lies, and
Yeah.
calling for horrendous things to be done. And what we don't understand is that those works, while we're like, who listens to that today? Well, those were some of the proof text that Hitler used to give legitimacy behind his Nazi ideology. So all of a sudden, you go to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, and it says what most Jews think about Christians. The very first thing you see when you come in says it was the Christian church in Germany that paved the way for the Nazi ideology that led to the Holocaust. So the average Jewish person, my father-in-law, for example, he grew up not a believer in New York, not in Israel, not some foreign country, in New York, right? Like, he's around Christians.
Yeah.
His idea was that the New Testament was a book written on how to persecute the Jews, that Christians were anti-Jews. If you set foot in a church, like, you were in danger of your life. Like that's how he grew up, with that stigma, and that still is the stigma that's around today. So it's so important for us, as we're looking to do ministry in Israel with Jewish people, to understand, just because our experience in our church context may be, oh, we love Israel, we love Jewish people, that's not the experience of most Jewish people, and that's not what they've been told by their parents and grandparents.
Right. Now let's shift a little bit to ministry amongst Arabs.
Yeah.
And then we're going to get to the complexities of what happened in October. When we were on tour with you on the bus, we went into the West Bank, and we arrived at a restaurant in Jericho, and there was this wonderful, amazing Arab family, and
Great
amazing
food.
Yeah,
Amazing food.
amazing
food.
food. I'd say one of our best
Yeah.
Best
my-
meals.
culinary
One of my
experiences.
favorite meals is a tabbouleh, and the Arabs make tabbouleh unlike anything else in Israel. So whenever I'm in an Arab town, I'm like, give me some tabbouleh. It's not the same with Israelis.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was like, oh wow, so Firm have these relationships with Christian Arabs and are doing a work alongside there too, and so that I think is really important for Canadians to hear as well.
Absolutely. I mean, our heart is for every person in Israel, not just every
Yes.
Jew, not just every Israeli, every person. And our nation is 20% Arab.
Right.
And when I say Arab, I have to explain that. That doesn't mean Muslim. 20% Arab, that could be Muslim Arabs or it could be Christian Arabs.
Yeah.
So there are people who are ethnically Arab, they're of Arab descent, but they are born Christian. Or there are people that were born Muslim of Arab descent that have come to faith in Jesus and now are Muslim background believers or Christian Arabs of a different kind. And so that's our heart for every person in our country. We don't discriminate. We have ministries serving Christian Arabs. Nazareth is a huge core base for this. Bethlehem, Jericho. You mentioned some of these places, and we want to see them come to know Yeshua as well.
Yeah, and then I mean, if Israel isn't complex enough, trying to do ministry with a diverse group of people that live there. And you're encouraging people to come on tours, to see it, to meet, to engage. All of a sudden, you have an experience in October, and it's a personal experience
Yeah.
because you're living there. Tell us about what happened on October 7th.
Well, I moved to Israel 10 years ago, and a month after I moved there was a war. So it's not my first time experiencing war in Israel, but what we experienced on October 7th was unlike something the country has experienced, not just in my 10 years, but I'd say in the last 75 years. Really unlike something. Why? It was a surprise attack, totally caught us off guard. It was on a Jewish holiday. It was the holiday of Shabbat, which is every week, but it was also the last day of Sukkot, which is our Feast of Tabernacles. So completely caught off guard. If you've ever been to Israel, you know when Jews have holidays, everything shuts down. It's like it's a solemn assembly, and like you better not be working and maybe not driving. And so everyone's off guard. It was a surprise attack, but we've had a surprise attack before in 1973. The
Yep.
Yom Kippur War on the Day of Atonement.
Yep.
But that war mostly affected military on borders. This was a surprise attack that killed an unprecedented number of civilians. 1,200 people killed. And I remember being there on the morning of October 7th. I'd had Shabbat dinner the night before with some friends from Canada. We went to sleep, woke up to the sounds of rockets. And when rockets are being fired, some places in Israel, you're used to hearing that. In Jerusalem, that's pretty rare that you'd have that happen. We're quite far away from Gaza, so it would take a pretty long-range rocket to reach Jerusalem. But these rocket sirens didn't stop all morning. I mean, it wasn't like a one-time thing. I actually did what you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to go to a bomb shelter. We had one in our home. Everyone has one in their homes. I ran outside because I couldn't believe it. Why is this siren? Looked up above my head. I see the rockets in the sky, and I see the Iron Dome taking out the rockets above our head. And we're hearing rocket attacks all across the country. Thousands of rockets fired in the span of just a few hours, starting at 6:30 in the morning. And we start looking at the news. And again, the news is hard to get because it's Shabbat. Most people have their phones off, even if you're religious. We start looking at the news and we see maybe terrorists even entered the country. It wasn't just rockets. It was they got through the border fence. Oh, now they got through on a boat. They actually paraglided into the country. There were terrorists coming in, and we thought at first maybe that was 10 or 15 terrorists. Ended up being over 3,000 terrorists that came in the country. They were in the country for 72 hours, for 3 full days. They killed 1,200 people, and not just killed, really murdered and burned people alive and killed babies. And then we heard the rumor that there were hostages. And that was unthinkable. And just to put that in context for people, the last hostage situation we had one Israeli soldier held hostage in Gaza. He was there 5 years. 5 years. And in order to get him released, there had to be a deal where Israel released 1,000 convicted Palestinian terrorists for one hostage. So that was unprecedented. In fact, one of the 1,000 prisoners that was released is the guy who led the strategic planning and the charge on October 7th. So just to put in our conscious what the thought of one hostage meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then we think, well, is there one? Is there two? We find over 250 hostages. So and nothing like this at a scale. I'm just trying to give the scale. It affected everyone in the country.
Yeah.
Everyone felt it. Everyone felt it because you either knew someone who was a family or family of a hostage, and then immediately on that day, 360,000 reservist soldiers were called up to the front line. So you were a father at home with your family. At 6:30 in the morning, you hear rockets. At 8:30, you get the call up, and you have to be down at the Gaza border by 10:30 in the morning. So you leave your home. You don't know how long, and now it's been over 5 months that people have been down there. And so it's just affected everyone. And that's the level of pain, level of grief. I would say even more painful was the next morning, October 8th, because we woke up to the images.
Right.
Like what we actually saw, oh my gosh, the brutality. These terrorists were on drugs to make them more aggressive, just lose some of their logic and rational senses, and what they did to women and what they did to kids. Just really tragic. And I think what we saw is really a picture of hatred and of our sin nature, like left like without God in the world. This is what the hatred looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just earlier in 2023, I was in Auschwitz for the first time. And we see the brutality of what happened there. We're like, how could this happen? Never again. And we're more civilized now. And I don't know that we are. I think evil is just as wicked today as it was 75 years ago or 80 years ago during World War II. And so it was breathtaking to witness that almost in real time through social media and through the news. And I think everyone around the world felt it.
So as citizens of Israel, as parents of two little boys, what's that like, at home on a personal level?
Yeah. Thankfully our boys are young. So hopefully they didn't feel it as much as possible. But I would say every parent has felt their kids feel the fear. I mean, we've had so many friends that are saying, man, my kids can't sleep at night. They're left up anxious, because now it's not just a rocket that you hear a siren, at least you have 90 seconds. What if someone comes into our home? Like, what if there's a terrorist in the country or someone on the street? So that level of fear has pervaded. We're seeing an unprecedented rise in anxiety attacks. I think for us personally, we didn't know what was going to happen. I probably very quickly responded and said, let's go and help people. And Vanessa is saying, we're living in Jerusalem. We're about a block away from a very Arab community that when terrorist attacks happen, that community, there's some tensions that usually flare up there. So what does it look like for our safety? What does it look like for our protection? Everyone's feeling like the confidence that the faith that we had in our government and our military and our intelligence was shaken. Right, because we felt pretty confident. We're like, we know when the head of Hamas goes to the toilet in Gaza. Like we have the great intelligence, and all of a sudden we felt like, how could this have happened? How could it have gone on for as long as it went on? How do we have no idea that it was going to happen? And so I think a lot of fear for most moms. You got to imagine you have 360 families that all of a sudden became single parents overnight. Single parents, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. They're home alone. The schools are closed. So now for the second time in 4 years, life has been interrupted. First by COVID, a year and a half, 2 years not in normal school. Now kids are out of school. And it's painful for everyone. So when I say everyone's felt it, I think everyone's felt it. I think especially Vanessa, if she was here, she would say it's been very heavy. It's heavy to hear the stories of the hostages. It's heavy to think about children that were taken away. And you just ask yourself, like, what does this mean for us? On top of that, in Israel, everyone serves in the military. So the soldiers are not like soldiers. They're sons and daughters, they're brothers and sisters. We're thinking, oh my gosh, our two boys, Azariah and Hananiah, like 15 years from now, they'll be in the military. And we also had team members that their family members were all of a sudden called up to the military. Some of our staff, some of the kids of staff members are brothers or sisters. So all of a sudden it becomes very personal. And it's not like far away overseas. They're like an hour and a half away from Jerusalem, and they're going into harm's way. And we don't know what that's going to look like. So it's very emotional for everyone in the country.
We were sitting at a little cafe, I guess, in the walled city. And we were sitting there having a little break from the heat, and up comes 3 IDF soldiers, but they were
teenagers.
Like,
yeah.
To us, they look like, like
most of them were female.
Teenagers. I think it was 2 girls and a boy or something. And this is what they were doing. They were, and so when this happened in October, I immediately thought about those 3 that we saw, and I thought, oh my goodness, like their parents are now thinking, what's happening to my child
Exactly.
who's in the IDF and has to go and serve?
Exactly. And
You
even
know,
on
so
October 7th, hundreds of teenagers that were serving in the military were killed because, again, they were caught off guard. They were in the military. They have entire bases with men and women that were attacked. It was just, it's a sobering reality. So there's a different kind of trauma for those who lost loved ones on October 7th. And there's also a different kind of trauma for those who have parents of military sons and daughters. It's a different thing.
So we're going to circle back to how God has opened a door.
Yeah.
Because I think it's quite phenomenal what's happening with Firm and its ministries right now in
Yeah.
Israel. But I would be amiss if I did not bring up the issue of Gaza. I know you're not a politician, and I'm not asking you to be
Yeah.
a politician. In fact, I love your heart. I feel like your heart is the heart of the gospel. But people who are listening or watching would say, yes, but that same anxiety, that same grief, that same, on a scale, much more is happening in Gaza. And it just seems to be being fueled. And there's just so much pain.
Yeah.
So what do you say to the pain and destruction of ordinary people in Gaza?
Everything to do with Israel and the Palestinians is really the story and the narrative of two people that have each experienced pain.
Yes.
Right? So there's real pain on both sides, and you can argue that the other person's pain is not legitimate, but it's real. It's real
Sure.
pain, right? So there's pain over this is our land or was our land or is promised to be our land. So there's pain. It's real. It's real stories. And I think that's important to understand when we try to, especially in the West, we're here in Canada, we're like, why is this happening? It just seems so simple. Why can't they just like make a state and be at peace and be okay with it? It's because it's a very emotional thing first, and then I think it's also a very spiritual thing. So I get very sad when I hear Christians that love Israel that harden their hearts towards people in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza. They deserve it. Oh, well, they elected Hamas. All it's true they elected Hamas.
Yes.
It's true. It's true that many of the things are true, but that to allow that to desensitize ourselves from saying there's real human pain, absolutely. We need to be grieved. Our hearts need to break. I think we should be praying for Palestinians in Gaza the same. And we have to separate the people of Gaza from Hamas, their leaders. And we don't know what it's like to live under a dictatorship where your only choice is a bad choice. We don't know what that's like. We don't know what it's like to live in this radical Islamic context or culture. We don't know what that's like. And so it's hard for us to even be able to say, well, did they have a choice? Did the people that were serving in Israel, the Palestinians, inform Hamas? Was their life threatened? What would happen if they spoke out against Hamas? I think what it comes down to for me is that our government is doing what I think any country would do. If there were thousands of people killed in an attack in Canada, Canada would have to retaliate and come back. And this was not like a one-off attack. They've been firing rockets at us for 15 years. Mm-hmm. So I understand what Israel's doing. At the same time, any country that is not filled with the Spirit of God and a spirit of forgiveness is going to harbor hate and bitterness. I mean, just look at 9/11 and the American people towards Osama bin Laden. I mean, there's a spirit of revenge. Yes. There's a spirit of hatred and bitterness
on both sides.
And anyone, I mean, it perpetuates a cycle, right?
Yes.
So then Israel comes in, and then the Palestinians see that, and the kid sees that, and they're like, oh, I hate Israelis. So it just continues the cycle. So do I think this? First of all, none of us want this war. I don't want this war. We don't want this war. We felt dragged into this war. At the same time, I don't think the war is going to solve the heart condition.
Exactly.
It's not going to solve the heart condition.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to work now is work with Jews and Arabs in our country, but mostly Jews that are calloused after October 7th, that said, man, we worked so hard to integrate and give them equal rights and be with Arabs, and this confirmed all of my biases. Arabs are just never going to love us. They're always going to be our enemies. And how do we prevent hearts from hardening on the Jewish side, and how do we change the heart on the Arab side so that there is this peace and reconciliation? That's our heart, and that's why I would say we're gospel-centered. I'm not going to stand up here and defend all of our government's decisions. On one side, I would say a lot of them are very logical, that any country would make to defend itself. On the other side, if you don't have the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Yeshua, who said, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. Love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. If we don't have that Spirit, then we're never going to be able to solve this crisis that's really in the hearts.
And I've heard you say that you were actively seeking ways to help
Absolutely.
in Gaza.
Absolutely.
The church in Gaza, Christians in Gaza, bring benevolence, alms, and
And our heart is for all people.
all people.
And I would say there's three, when we talk about Christian Arabs or Arabs in general, there's three layers of who we're able to help. So a Christian Arab in Israel, they're being affected too. Right, they're not as bad as someone in Gaza, but they're affected too. So we're able to reach them. Christians in the West Bank, it's a little easier for us to access. So we're doing more work there. And there are some things that we're doing in Gaza. Unfortunately, the Christian community in Gaza is so small that they don't even want us really to share the things that we're able to help them do because of fear for their own safety and protection. So we have to be looking, how can we help in any way possible? I think that needs to be the answer. And if I have to give someone something to pray for, we're praying for God to remove political and national leaders that are fostering a spirit of hatred, whether on the Israeli side or on the Palestinian side. Hamas, it's in their charter, but there are people in our government as well that foster a spirit of hatred, and that's not helpful right now. And we want that removed so that God's spirit of forgiveness, of reconciliation, of peace can reign.
Yeah. Give an illustration of what you've seen through Jesus Christ, the work of the church, the work of the Holy Spirit in Jew and Arab, because you've seen the two groups come together under Christ.
Yes.
Forgive, love, and work together.
Yes.
Which is the hope, right?
Yes. We have friends, Jewish friends, that after experiencing a terrorist attack have been able to forgive their Arab brothers, their Arab persecutors. We've had stories of Arabs who, because of the power of the gospel, say, man, I'm going to reach out to other Arabs, but I'm also going to reach out and bring the good news to Jewish people. And that provokes Jews to jealousy. We have one story about this older woman, a Holocaust survivor in the Nazareth area. Nazareth is mostly an Arab town. And one of our local partners, he's a pastor, Christian Arab pastor, his name's Salim in Nazareth. He went and was actually doing some outreach projects in the Jewish area. And she looked at him bringing a food basket to her house, and she said, "You're an Arab." She said, "We're supposed to be enemies. What are you doing? Like, I'm Jewish. Like, you're at the wrong house." And he responded, he said, "Well, because of your Messiah, we could be friends." Like, he didn't say it because of our Messiah. He said because of your Messiah. And she said, "Well, our Messiah hasn't come yet." He said, "Well, they haven't told you?" And she invited him into her home, which that already was crazy.
Yeah.
And he showed her in her own Hebrew scriptures, Isaiah 53, and we got to lead her to the Lord. And again, we read about Gentiles provoking Jews to jealousy. I think Arabs are some of the most potent Gentiles that can provoke Jews to jealousy, because there's like, we're supposed to be enemies, but only through the power of the gospel can Arabs say to a Jewish brother, I love you, and the Jewish person say to an Arab that. And I think actually right now in the country, us modeling Jews and Arabs together is huge, because we had that before October 7th. There were Arabs working with Jews at a hotel in Jerusalem. There were Arabs and Jews that would do a party together. But after October 7th, everything got polarized. No more Arabs allowed into the country. No more work visas. No, we don't trust them. And so the only place in the country right now where we're seeing Jewish and Arab unity is in the body of believers in the church. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And it's opened a phenomenal. We're running out of time, but okay. So give us an illustration of the current crisis working together for good for the gospel to bring about something that you are surprised, that you're surprised at actually seeing.
We just tried to be obedient. So nothing I'm going to share is really to our credit. We just said, God, how can you use us in this moment? I feel like we were in the right place at the right time. And in crisis, people come together. All of a sudden, the things we think are so big, I don't like the color of their pew. I like orange pew. The things that used to be big things become small things, and we just started working together. So the whole body came together, and we, because of our role, kind of we're in the central facilitating hub, and just started to bring food and water and help evacuate people and relocate families and help provide emergency crisis response food. 3 days after the war, I was like eager to drive down to the Gaza border communities, people that had been in their bomb shelters for 3 days, and just how can we help them in some way? And what did we see? We started seeing government leaders that we would have been maybe a little bit timid to work with in the past, because the idea of a Messianic Jew or a Jewish believer is actually something quite repulsive. One of the guys said, yeah, before the war, you guys were like enemy number one, talking about believers in Jesus. And so we've seen more openness where people are like, if you're here to help us and you're doing it at a level of excellence that exceeds anything we're getting from even Jewish non-believers or from the government, then we're willing to take your help. So there's an ability for us to reach more people than ever before. We actually had a Canadian family that wrote us out of the blue in October and said, we want to donate a hotel to you in Jerusalem for you to use to house displaced families. So we started taking in, we show up at the hotel, there's no one there. It was all Arab workers before the war, and now they weren't able to come into the country. We said, hey, we could fill this place in 2 days. Give us 2 days. They staffed up. We brought in, and now still Arab workers working here, housing Jewish evacuees. So just look at that, right? Like now we have to take some extra security concerns, but it's quite a testimony that these Arab workers are serving these Jewish evacuees, displaced families, over 400 of them. And that turned into one hotel, turned into two, turned into a guest house, turned into 7 different locations, us hosting 1,500 people.
Wow.
And you can imagine, I mean, when you bring someone a food basket, we've done a lot of the food baskets, we've done a lot of meals, that makes an impact. But when you take care of someone for a month, for 3 months, for 4 months, you're feeding them every meal, and you're providing a home for them, activities for their kids. There's a connection in the heart that takes place. And now that's opened up a door for us to help them move back to their homes and to rebuild and restore and build schools and all sorts of things that we never ever thought we would even do. We've never done before, but God just opened a door. We just kept saying yes. We just kept saying yes. And we said, we're going to keep saying yes as long as God continues to open doors for fresh ministry, that we're going to keep saying yes.
I love that, Michael. I love that God has given you favor, has given the ministries of Firm an anointing for this time of love and forgiveness, and it's just it's so beautiful. I know from your story that there's a need in Israel actually for workers, and so you're not doing tours right now. You're actually working with Christians from North America to come over and do work, because people aren't coming from the West Bank. People from other countries have had to leave. And there's a shortage of workers in the kibbutz.
And Israel thinks of Christians as tourists that come and take. They don't see Christians as people that come and serve. And that's all changing right now. So we started hosting hope and healing service trips. We had people come from all over the world. I'm talking about dozens and dozens of countries around the world. We had someone come all the way from up north, British Columbia, 5 different airplanes to get over to Israel. And whether it's a short-term trip, come for a week or two, or you want to come for an extended amount of time, a month, 2, 3. We have someone coming for 6 months to actually work on the communities most affected. And if you have skills in childcare or youth work, or you have skills with construction or anything in terms of building, these are the skills that we need right now. And there's really a unique opportunity for churches to say, hey, we'll bring a trip over. We'll bring 10 people. We're going to make sure it's safe. We're going to make sure everyone's staying in safe zones. We have security guards with everyone. So we're going to make sure the safety is there. But there's such a unique moment in history for the church to be the hands and feet of Jesus, not just come to walk where Jesus walked, but actually come and serve like Jesus served. And I think it's just a unique opportunity. And so I want to encourage anyone who wants to do that. You can find out more on our website about Firm, and we'd love to help customize something from your church, especially construction workers. We can use a lot of construction workers right now.
So if people did that, it is to go and to serve. It's not like they wouldn't be doing like a tour of anything.
So there's both. So when people come, we do want you to see the country. It would be a shame to serve and not see the Sea of Galilee. So we do want you to see the country. And now we are starting as of this summer to have like Bible tours back with a service element. So about 70% touring and 30% serving. So the borders are open for people to come back. Obviously, it's based on what people are comfortable with. I think most people will start coming back around the fall or early into 2025.
So more serving than like when we went. We did a
serving,
little bit. So this would be a higher percentage of serving than what our team experienced.
And it's only because there's more need right now than ever, right?
Of course,
it's very easy to fill a schedule full of serving.
Exactly.
And it's not just the work that gets done. That's what I need everyone to hear. It's not just the work that gets done. It's the testimony you leave. Because people ask, why would you come here at a time like this? And here's what we feel like God gave us. When you're hurting, It's the people who show up for you in your time of need. Like, I got in an accident. I almost lost my arm. It was the people who showed up for me in the hospital room. And I'm like, wow, you're my real friends. Like, you really care. So, like, when you show up for someone in their time of need, that speaks louder than words. And I think that's the opportunity we have right now.
Peter, in his epistle, says that his expectation, his joy would be that their love and good deeds
Yeah.
would cause people to stop and to think about God.
Absolutely.
And I really believe that's what's happening through Firm and others in Israel today. Now, there's one more thing that's really important. I hope that CLA is able to put together a bit of an eclectic team that could go over and be involved in servanthood, helping at this strategic time.
We know you're really good at construction, Derek. So
Well,
we were hoping
I'm-
But
you would.
I am.
Oh,
I am.
Yeah, that's
there we
true.
go, there we go.
I could come with my saws and my
She
sanders.
She has that spiritual gift.
Yeah.
And we have others too. But something amazing that's happening right now, and I want our Canadian listeners to hear this. You have an opportunity to take a massive step forward with Firm in Jerusalem by buying a piece of property. And I've seen the piece of property. I'm not sure if we can put it up on the podcast for YouTube, but tell us about this opportunity because it's so amazing.
Yeah, it's been in our hearts for a number of years to own a ministry center in Jerusalem. And with everything going on in the war, our operations have expanded immensely. And we found this piece of property. In fact, I was just dreaming, and I said, it would be great to find something just like this. And someone heard it, and they said, I know exactly the place. So there's a piece of property overlooking the Mount of Olives in the old city of Jerusalem. There's an amazing place that would be a place for our ministry center. We'd have a visitor center for people that are coming, an education center, but also a leadership academy, a place for innovative new ministry, collaborative projects to be birthed. Really, this would be enough space for us. So we're kind of in this miracle faith journey right now. In fact, just last week, I was with some people that were like really challenging us to take a step of faith as a ministry. And CLA has already been so generous to help us in this. So I just would ask for prayers for us to believe together that we can have a gospel hub in Jerusalem that would serve dozens of ministries. I believe in hopefully hundreds of ministries across the country with this ministry center in Jerusalem.
Yeah. And as we draw to a close, I am glad that we set a goal of $250,000 for CLA to cheerlead you on, but I know that it's like an $8 million project or something. So it's really big, and it's going to take a miracle. But I believe
the prices are similar to Vancouver prices. So
in Jerusalem,
in Jerusalem, the prices in Jerusalem are similar to
Vancouver.
Downtown Vancouver or downtown Toronto.
Yeah, well, that helps us have a perspective. Michael, thank you so much for coming to CLA's missions emphasis. And I know that you have had opportunity to be around North America for a few weeks. I just want to ask you this as we close. Were you surprised with the North American response to what's happening over there? Was your heart a bit sad, or how did you guys process that?
I think for both Vanessa and I, the surprise was just how much other people's lives have moved on. Because our lives haven't moved on. We're still living in the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
We went to a pastor's conference in California, and everyone's just going on with their life, like they're not thinking about the hostages. They're not staying tuned to the news. So maybe you heard about it in October, November, and kind of have forgotten. So that was the surprise. It's just, wow, this is not a big deal for everyone else anymore, like it is for us.
Right.
That's natural. That will happen.
Right.
We've been very encouraged, though, by those who have said, man, I've been praying for Israel every night, or praying for the situation there. So I think just staying updated, knowing what's happening, staying connected. If you know an Israeli, Palestinian, being able to empathize with them, I think that empathy just means so much rather than just being ignorant about what's happening over there. So I think this is a helpful resource, hopefully, for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, and I know that you coming to CLA has helped us understand in a greater way. It's also, you've challenged us with this issue of anti-Semitic reality in North America, to be bold, to stand up against that. But you've also challenged us to pray. And so how best do we pray?
Yeah. going back to what we talked about, I really think it's not just praying for the current issue, but praying for the root of the issue. The root of the issue, which is we want Palestinians in Gaza to be able to live in a free, thriving culture context with godly leaders that lead them well, that care for their people. That would be my prayer for the Palestinians. Yes, we want freedom for the Palestinians, but we want freedom from external forces and also from some internal forces that are really causing their lives to be a living hell. Yeah. We want to eliminate the cycle of hatred. So my prayer for both Palestinians and for Israelis would be that the children don't internalize what's been happening over these last 5 months into systemic hatred that perpetuates down generationally. So how do we see healing from that? And then praying for the church, praying for the body of believers, both Jews and Arabs and others that are engaging in this space to say, how can we use what the enemy intends for evil to actually be a source of great hope, comfort, and many people coming to know the Lord? Because at the end of the day, if a politician could have solved the Middle East conflict, they would have done it by now. It's going to be solved by the Prince of Peace, by Jesus. Yeah. And so we have to invest resources and time and prayer into seeing his church in the Middle East shine forth. And that's going to help solve the systemic problem in the hearts of Jews and Arabs.
Well, we have run out of time, but it has been so good to have you back in Canada. We're proud of you. When I look at you and Vanessa, I feel that everything in your life has made you ready for this moment. Thank you. And I would say that to all those listening too. What God has done in your life has prepared you for whatever you're going to face in 2024. And I'm just glad that we've had this time together and you've been able to educate us and spur us on in prayer and in partnership. Coming to the Orange Pew, I've decided that I have a gift for those that come. And it's an orange. It's a chocolate orange. So I give out now these chocolate oranges. So
Amazing.
I have the original chocolate orange is this one. And then the dark chocolate orange is this one. And so I wanted to know if you wanted the dark or the regular chocolate.
Now think about Vanessa here.
Vanessa wants the dark one, so I will take the dark
there
chocolate
you go.
orange.
Well, thank you.
Nice.
Thank you very much for being with us.
It's an honor.
We're praying for you. We're looking forward to ongoing partnerships. And if you're part of CLA and you haven't given yet to our great missionary project, we want you to do that because we want these guys to leave a lasting legacy, a footprint in Jerusalem. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And join us next time on the Orange Pew. We're looking forward to having you, and you're going to enjoy our next guest. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Orange Pew. To stay up to date, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or YouTube Podcasts. We'll see you next time.